Okay, hey everybody, welcome to Module 3, Week 3, which is really crazy to say. So Week 3 of 8, and we're just moving right along. And it's been good so far to see how you've embraced the course, how you've embraced the content. Like I told you from the very beginning, this class I think is it's just a very practical course, right? And right now you're engaging with that cover letter or that resume process, that CV, personal statement space, and researching, your field and pursuing a research interest of your own from a large list of resources or possible research topics. So, I hope that you're enjoying the class so far. We're more than a quarter of the way through, and by the end of this week, we'll be kind of more than a third of the way through, and we just kind of keep plowing ahead. So keep in mind that this is a marathon, not a sprint. But because we're in an 8-week format, it's kind of a sprinting marathon. It's tricky. What I'm trying to highlight is that you don't want to get so discouraged if you've missed some early things because there's a lot of time left in the course. But at the same time, you don't want to miss things because we move so quickly. So to that end, we'll do a Module 3 overview briefly. I'll give you some tips and some things to watch out for as I grade some of your Module 2 work and anything that might have been missed from Module 1 this week, and try to give you some feedback or let you know if you're not on the right track, depending on what it is and what assignment it is. And yeah, and that'll be the little video I share with you. I dropped a bunch of every seed bagel crumbs on my mouse, so that's fun, and I can feel them all in my crooked teeth. So here we go. Let me share my screen with you all. So in our course. Here it is. These are our learning goals. You can see we've got a lot of specific learning goals that we can move through here, a lot of things related to information use and citation piece. But we're going to get into the library website and some scholarly databases in this module because this is an English class and you will be doing some research and some writing. And in order to write well, we have to be able to research well, and we've got to be able to find the sources that we need to use in order to do the writing because that's how we gain credibility. Right, we have sources to make us more credible so that way a reader doesn't just think, oh, that's what Joe Betts is saying. It's no, it's what Joe Betts is sharing from these sources that have what we would say a strong ethos, credibility. So as always, you're thinking about how can I manage roughly 6 hours of time to focus on this class. And the timing breakdown here shows that it's less than 6 total hours of expected time to spend on the course. But as always, you want to give yourself 6 hours, break that down, use tomatoes like this, 25-minute timers to work, and then break to manage your time, and you're going to be just fine. Okay, so our learning materials here, you'll go through and remember to read these items in order, and then other items to refer back to help you with some of our learning content or some of our assessment content. We have a quiz here, so a quiz that's going to test you a little bit on your reading, a short quiz, small number of points, no time limit, right? The goal is not to try to trick you, it's to give you, do the reading, take the quiz. If there's something that you don't know, and you got to go back to the reading and find it, right? And that's the learning. That's what we have to engage with, that content knowledge. And then we have this peer review space. And apologies for some of the confusion with how to set this up. The course, the way that discussions just have to work, it's always just a little confusing in an online class, and especially whenever you're working over multiple modules. So you're going to post the draft that you have for your resume and cover letter within this space too, and then provide feedback to your peer. You can keep working on your resume and cover letter all the way through this Friday, but you need to give your peer feedback pretty quickly before the end of the day on Monday, which is also whenever the final draft of the resume and cover letter is due. So, the sooner you can submit the draft of your resume slash cover letter or your curriculum vitae slash personal statement to this space and give someone some peer review, the better. And a quick note on peer review and why we do this. Peer review is really a self-editing tool. So whenever we write something, we know what we want to say, we know what we are hoping to convey to a reader, right? But we don't always get there, and we need to hear from a reader to see if we are meeting that particular goal that we think we have met. But we have to become our own best editors because as we move off into the real world, we're not always going to have someone to look over our writing. And we're not always going to be able, and we should never trust the output from some generative AI tool or something like that because they hallucinate and they don't give us what we want all the time. And they're just trying to tell us what we want to hear anyway. So we need to be able to critically analyze our own writing, our own documents. And the way that we can do that and train that muscle is through peer review. We can look at other people who are trying to do the same thing, and then we can try to take that objective, critical eye, place it back on our writing. Okay. We then have a virtual library exercise that's going to send us into the databases. So you're going to get into the Ivy Tech databases. We're specifically going to be looking at the Opposing Viewpoints database, this EBSCOhost Opposing Viewpoints database, which year over year, even month over month, semester over semester, sometimes access to databases becomes limited. The last I checked, this database was still available. If you run into any issues, though, accessing opposing viewpoints, we'll look for an alternative database through which to complete this activity for you. But just to make sure to get us in there, make sure we're comfortable using that space. And then you're going to find a source that's going to support your research for this term, and you're going to post this with a summary and proper APA citation and a statement on its use for you as a source to help you investigate the issue that you're investigating this semester. And there are a couple of there's an example here of what it is I'm expecting you to write. Okay. And then lastly, um, next by next Monday, okay, June 29th, you will be submitting the final draft of your resume and cover letter. Okay. And so you want to try to take the feedback from your peer, and then you also want to look to see if I've given you any feedback based on the things that you've submitted in Module 2, because you would have posted a working draft of your writing in Module 2, or you're going to be posting maybe something else here, maybe an updated version here in Module 3. And I'm going to look through those and just to make sure that you're not wildly off. So I will let you know if you have really missed the mark. Otherwise, if you don't hear from me, then you're on the right track and just trying to make it as best as you can, thinking about how this work will be graded. And the grading for this work is delivered to you right here. There's a rubric down here at the bottom. This is what I look at, and I think, okay, did they do these things? Yes or no? And then I just click through, and I'm giving you points for your work within using this rubric to try to grade you as objectively as I can. Okay, so that is Module 3 in a nutshell. It's coming together with this very critical document that we all use and need in our professional lives and continue to develop through our professional lives as we move to different jobs or take on different roles or after, transition to a new career, those types of things. So we engage with that a lot and we finalize that this week. And then we start to and then we start to focus a bit more on our research topic for this term that interest us and diving into the databases to make sure we know how to use those because we're going to be in there. We're going to be finding more sources. We're going to be annotating those sources because the better we know a source, the easier it is to write with whatever we need to write using that source's information. If you have questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you to all those who, whenever a little hiccup in the language or a technical issue pops up, thank you for reaching out to me and making me aware of that so I can adjust things and send out announcements to the class as quickly as possible. The nature of a fully asynchronous online course means that there will, it's trying to write out and spell out everything, but you know, there are always going to be some mistakes. There are always going to be a couple of little issues that pop up, and you'll never be penalized for, an issue that comes up on my end or the college's end, as these courses are pre-developed courses that instructors, faculty members like me get to adjust and move around a little bit. You're never going to be penalized for that, and it's always just better to ask me a question about something if the language is confusing so I can adjust and clarify if needed. And just thank you for that, and please continue to do that this term. So if you have any questions again, reach out to me through email and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, have a great week this week and take good care. Bye, everybody.